Hello, my joy-filled friends. Welcome back. Today, we're going to read Genesis chapter 10 and 11. So, get your Bible and let's get started. Genesis chapter 10. This is the history of the families of Shem, Ham, and Japheth, the three sons of Noah. Many children were born to them after the flood. The descendants of Japheth were Gomer, Magog, Madai, Javan, Tubal, Meshech, and Tiras. The descendants of Gomer were Ashkenaz, Riphath, and Togarmah. The descendants of Javan were Elisha, Tarshish, Kittim, and Rodanim. Their descendants became the seafaring peoples in the various lands, each tribe with its own language. The descendants of Ham were Cush, Mizraim, Put, and Canaan. The descendants of Cush were Seba, Havilah, Sabta, Ramah, and Sabteka. The descendants of Ramah were Sheba and Dedan. These are so hard to pronounce. I have no idea, and I'm sure I am messing it up terribly, but it's here, it's in the Bible, and we read every word. So we just keep trying and do the best we can. All right, verse 8, chapter 10, verse 8. One of Cush's descendants was Nimrod, who became a heroic warrior. He was a mighty hunter in the Lord's sight. His name became proverbial, and people would speak of someone as being, quote, like Nimrod, a mighty hunter in the Lord's sight. He built the foundation for his empire in the land of Babylonia, with the cities of Babel, Erech, Akkad, and Calneh. From there, he extended his reign to Assyria, where he built Nineveh, Rehoboth, Calah, and Rezin, the main city of the empire located between Nineveh and Calah. Mizraim was the ancestor of the Ludites, Anamites, Lehabites, Nephtuhites, Pathrusites, Kashuhites, and the Caphtorites, from whom the Philistines came. Oh my goodness. Terrible, terrible. There's a lot of ites, and it's just, that goes throughout the Bible, really. Canaan's oldest son was Sidon, the ancestor of the Sidonians. Canaan was also the ancestor of the Hittites, Jebusites, Amorites, Girgashites, Hivites, Arkites, Sinites, Arvadites, Zamorites, and Hamathites. Eventually, the territory of Canaan spread from Sidon to Gerar near Gaza, and to Sodom, Gomorrah, Admah, and Zeboim near Lasha. These were the descendants of Ham, identified according to their tribes, languages, territories, and nations. Sons were also born to Shem, the older brother of Japheth. Shem was the ancestor of all the descendants of Eber. The descendants of Shem were Elam, Asher, Arphaxad, Lud, and Aram. The descendants of Aram were Uz, Hul, Gether, and Mash. Arphaxad was the father of Shelah, and Shelah the father of Eber. Eber had two sons. The first was named Peleg, meaning division, for during his lifetime the people of the world were divided into different language groups and dispersed. His brother's name was Joktan. Joktan was the ancestor of Almodad, Shalef, Hazarmaveth, Jerah, Hadaram, Uzal, Diklal, Obal, Abimael, Sheba, Ophir, Havilah, and Jobab. The descendants of Joktan lived in the area extending from Mesha toward the eastern hills of Sephar. These were the descendants of Shem, identified according to their tribes, languages, territories, and nations. These are the families that came from Noah's sons, listed nation by nation according to their lines of descent. The earth was populated with the people of these nations after the flood. My goodness, so many difficult names. All right. Again, the important part is to identify certain things that were important, like the heroic warrior Nimrod, and where the Philistines came from the land, Ham. It came from the line of Ham, and Ham, as we remember, was cursed. Him and the Canaanites earlier when he disrespected his father Noah, and so that is kind of like a prelude almost to what's to come. Also, in verse 19, the territory of Canaan spread from Sidon to Gerar near Gaza, and to Sodom, Gomorrah, Admah, etc. Sodom and Gomorrah we learn about later. Very important cities to define evil, and they're eventually destroyed. So it's just interesting to see the beginning of and the introduction of those two cities as well. Okay, so chapter 11, much easier to read, hopefully. Chapter 11, the Tower of Babel. At one time, the whole world spoke a single language and used the same words. As the people migrated eastward, they found a plain in the land of Babylonia and settled there. They began to talk about construction projects. Come, they said, and let's make great piles of burnt brick and collect natural asphalt to use as mortar. Let's build a great city with a tower that reaches to the skies, a monument to our greatness. This will bring us together and keep us from scattering all over the world. But the Lord came down to see the city and the tower the people were building. Verse 6. Look, he said, if they can accomplish this when they have just begun to take advantage of their common language and political unity, just think of what they will do later. Nothing will be impossible for them. Come, let's go down, give them different languages, then they won't be able to understand each other. In that way, the Lord scattered them all over the earth, and that ended the building of the city. That is why the city was called Babel, because it was there that the Lord confused the people by giving them many languages, thus scattering them across the earth. So interesting. What we just saw right before that, in chapter 10, verse 31, these were the descendants of Shem. No, that's not right. That's not what I wanted to read. Peleg. Sorry. In chapter 10, verse 24, Arphaxad was the father of Shelah, and Shelah the father of Eber. Eber had two sons. The first was named Peleg, meaning division, for during his lifetime, the people of the world were divided into different language groups and dispersed. So, descendant of Shem, and several lines down, and now we have Babel, where people are dispersed. Very interesting. So Babel sounds like a Hebrew term that means confusion. So can you imagine? I don't know how long it took, but was it in an instant? The Lord comes down, he sees what's going on, and he looks and says, "No, this is not good. They're building a monument to themselves, and um, look at all the unity that they have together. But if they have all of this and they're displaying their own power, what will they be able to do later when there are more people?" And um, so he decides, no, this is not good. We're going to disperse them. We're going to confuse them all, and we're going to give them many different languages. So you're standing there, you're building next to your friend, um, who knows what his name is, and you're speaking to each other just fine. And then possibly in an instant, or maybe the next day when your friend arrives to work and he speaks, he's speaking in a different language and you can't understand him. I mean, talk about confusion. And you can't communicate. You're trying to build something together, and now you have all these people speaking in different languages. So was it families? I mean, we don't even know. Were there families who spoke the same language, but different family spoke a different language now, and so that created a division, and off they go. This family goes over here because they can speak to each other, but family B goes over here to a whole different land so they can speak to each other and they can start their own city. Those who were once friends can't communicate. I mean, I have no idea. I don't know how this worked. It's fascinating that it even happened. Uh, but it's fun to think about, you kind of, you just think, I wonder how that went down. How much time went by, and what did they do? But basically what they were building completely stopped, which is good because God didn't want that. God didn't want any other idols, which, later when he gives the law to Moses, we see that's one of the commandments. You shall not have any other gods but me. So, they were building this monument, which is basically an idol, or a representation of themselves, which they were making themselves as gods. So anyway, very interesting. So the Tower of Babel is no more, and now we have the history of Shem's family. We already know Shem's line of descent here. We just read that, but now for some reason we have the history of his family, which we'll read through and see how many years did these guys live. So verse 10, this is the history of Shem's family. When Shem was 100 years old, his son Arphaxad was born. This happened 2 years after the flood. After the birth of Arphaxad, Shem lived another 500 years and had other sons and daughters. When Arphaxad was 35 years old, his son Shelah was born. After the birth of Shelah, Arphaxad lived another 403 years and had other sons and daughters. When Shelah was 30 years old, his son Eber was born. After the birth of Eber, Shelah lived another 403 years and had other sons and daughters. When Eber was 34, his son Peleg was born, and after the birth of Peleg, Eber lived another 430 years and had other sons and daughters. Everybody has other sons and daughters. When Peleg was 30, his son Roy was born. After the birth of Roy, Peleg lived another 209 years and had other sons and daughters. When Roy was 32 years old, his son Serug was born. After the birth of Serug, Roy lived another 207 years and had other sons and daughters. When Serug was 30, his son Nahor was born, and after the birth of Nahor, Serug lived another 200 years and had other sons and daughters. When Nahor was 29, his son Terah was born, and after the birth of Terah, Nahor lived another 119 years and had other sons and daughters. When Terah was 70 years old, he became the father of Abram, Nahor, and Haran. Aha, Abram. All right, we're getting somewhere here. See, we have to go through this line, this genealogy, and we learn where prominent figures of our history come from. Okay, verse 26. When Terah was 70 years old, he became the father of Abram, Nahor, and Haran. This is the history of Terah's family. Terah was the father of Abram, Nahor, and Haran had a son named Lot. But while Haran was still young, he died in Ur of the Chaldeans, the place of his birth. He was survived by Terah, his father. Meanwhile, Abram married Sarai, and her brother Nahor married Milcah, the daughter of their brother Haran. Milcah had a sister named Iscah, and Sarai was not able to have any children. Sarai. Terah took his son Abram, his daughter-in-law Sarai, and his grandson Lot, left Ur of the Chaldeans to go to the land of Canaan, but they stopped instead at the village of Haran and settled there. Terah lived for 205 years and died while still at Haran. And next we have the story of Abram, whom you may know becomes Abraham and Sarai becomes Sarah. And many nations are born out of the line of Abraham. So we'll get to chapter 12 where we learn about Abram and how all of that turns out. But for now, that was a lot. And that's a lot of names and cities and territories that I can't pronounce, and I'm sorry for messing them up or stumbling over them. But again, like I said, it's here. It was important to God enough to write it down, and therefore it's important to us. So we could do studies on more of these names and things, but for now, I think that this is a good stopping point, and I encourage you, as always, to dig in for yourselves and see what you find, because we have quite an interesting and fascinating history. So, all right. Thank you so much for joining me today. We'll see you next time.